The All Elite Podcast. Covering all the latest news and results from the AEW.
Wait a minute. Sean Spears? Spears with a chair shot right to the side of the head of Cody.
This is pro wrestling analysis as you've never heard before.
Deathly Hallows!
Might be it.
1, 2, 3, Kasabian!
Coming to you every single week. So without any further delay, let's go all in and get the show started right now.
Hello and welcome everybody to AEW Aftershock. I'm your host, Zach Perez, at Spots High on Twitter. And what a great week of Dynamite we had to kick off December. And it seems like after a little bit of the holiday hangover last week in Chicago, they definitely got things right for the town of Champaign, Illinois, fittingly enough. So they definitely seem to have found the formula once again of mixing things together with great matches and great angle work. And I think that everything just cohesively went together. And they also addressed some issues with their women's division. And I think they're finally paying the right sort of attention and building some long-lasting storylines on that side as well. So some great things going on with this week's Dynamite. And we're going to jump right into it. So right at the top of the card this week, we had a fantastic six-man tag match with the Young Bucks and Dustin Rhodes taking on Sammy Guevara and Santana and Ortiz of the Inner Circle. And this was just a great way to kick off the night. So much intensity. The crowd is really behind Dustin Rhodes making his return from injury, having that broken arm, or broken wrist rather, at the hands of Jake Hager. So much babyface love for the brother of Cody, and you can just really feel how much they're behind him in the machine that is AEW, and the fan base is really just so much for the two brothers, and Dustin was really showing off and doing his thing in this match, and there's a lot left in the tank for him, and getting the "You Still Got It" chants, and Uncle Buck or Old Buck or Gold Buck, whatever you want to call him. He's wearing the tassels like the Young Bucks, and he's looking amazing doing all the spots and even doing some aerial offense, some flipping sentons and flipping off the top rope like the Young Bucks, and just a really great showing out party for him coming back off that injury and just looking just as fitting in that contest as Matt and Nick Jackson, and doing a great job of keeping up with them and having a nice little spot where he had to take an old man break for his running power slams, and that was a nice little moment. So just all around a great way to get the crowd going, get the crowd popping off. And I have to say that there was so much more energy in Champaign, Illinois than there was in Chicago, Illinois for last week. And like I said, I don't know if that's the hangover effect of the holidays going into last week, if there's more people packed in towards the front, this being Tony Khan's hometown and all, but it was just a very electric crowd, and they were very much behind this episode, and a lot of reason to be behind it. So great way to kick off the evening, and Ortiz, Santana, and Sammy all doing their own individual stuff. A great 630 splash by Sammy in particular that looked beautiful, very Ricochet-esque. If you've seen some of the things that he's done on the independent scene, he used to do this people's leg drop version of like a shooting star leg drop standing. So that's pretty impressive if you ever want to look up some clips of Sammy Guevara. So just a really talented individual, and doing some great heel work in this as well. Some great storytelling of the building feud between the three, as we had the introduction of the sock filled with the baseballs getting used as a weapon also. So a great little way to continue on with what's going on and building towards what will probably be the Match Beyond, or the War Games version of or the War Games equivalent that AEW is going to probably do at some point down the line. So we'll see where this takes it, but this was a great way of getting the crowd going. A nice little triple super kick at one point. A lot of nice little spots, and it ended up with a double Meltzer driver sent-on combo that really just looked beautiful, sold really nicely by Santana, Ortiz, and Sammy, and just put everybody over nicely and kind of levels the playing field a little bit, considering the fact that they've, for the most part, just been getting beaten up a lot of the time by Santana, Ortiz, and Sammy, and the Inner Circle and the whole lot. So I think that it's good to see the baby faces get a one-up in this situation on Dustin's return, and probably that'll get even back out at some point, knowing the underhanded nature of Jericho and the kind of things that we've seen from him in the past, but we'll see how that goes. But that is just the nature of Jericho and his Inner Circle, I suppose, right? But next up, we ended up having my probable match of the night, which was Trent versus Rey Fenix. And, you have to say, Rey Fenix might just be one of the best wrestlers in the entire world right now. I mean, just consistent match work. I mean, the matches that he's having all over the planet, it's very similar to when Kenny Omega was having his kind of coming out party, just wrestling all over the globe, doing matches in the Tokyo Dome, and then coming back to the United States and having, just constant 5-star matches here as well. It's the same kind of thing with Rey Fenix. I mean, it's just all the time he's putting on these crazy contests, and Trent playing a wonderful job of highlighting him as well, kind of playing the power maneuver role here of hitting some hard-hitting moves to kind of counter a lot of the high-flying offense that Rey was hitting in the matchup here. So just a great kind of back-and-forth counterfest, and every time one would gain momentum, the other would kind of have a counter for it. Great little moment on the outside where Trent got whipped into the barricade and then came back with a spear shortly after, and it just had the crowd very much on the edge of their seat, and kind of doubled down on the already electric atmosphere that they had gotten from the 6-man tag. So just constant build up, and it just led in beautifully to the rest of the opening of this card. And I just thought that it was a beautiful contrast to what they had going in the previous week, and kind of that lagging feeling. It was just a breakneck pace, and this matchup was just exactly the type of wrestling that I envision when I think of what I want to see out of AEW. So if I were to kind of point somebody to the direction of what I like and what I love out of AEW, it's exactly this type of match. So fantastic matchup, and go and watch it if you haven't, because I can't simply talk it to give it justice. So it's worth watching, and I would just simply say it's as close to a 5-star matchup as you can get with the time constraints of television and commercial interruptions and all that sort of thing. And I loved it, and I was thoroughly entertained by two very talented individuals, and I highly recommend it to anybody who enjoys the sport of wrestling, or the entertainment of wrestling, whatever you want to call it nowadays. But regardless, this got the crowd very hyped and led into the other Rhodes brother getting the crowd even more hyped for an excellent promo, which called back to the days of Ric Flair and his father Dusty Rhodes, kind of doing a promo callback to when he was feuding with his father there in WCW over the World Heavyweight belt, the big gold belt there. And so very interesting work, and kind of flipping it on its head and doing it in a babyface role, and kind of saying, take my expensive watch, my expensive truck, and it's 1 out of 500. But there was a lot of interesting significance to all the items. The watch comes from Tony Khan. The shoes actually were gifted to him by Brandy Rhodes. The car actually happens to be, like he said, 1 out of 500, and one that MJF actually personally enjoyed the luxury of looking at by personally being friends with Cody. So there's a lot of smart storytelling in the way that it was delivered, in the way that it was done. And I just want to play a quick clip and excerpt from the actual referenced promo from Ric Flair, just as a point of comparison, just so you can kind of side by side see the heel versus face and the sort of 30 30-something years of difference in the way that people cut their promos and what they're talking about and the way that is delivered, but the similar threads that they're connected by. So I'm going to go ahead and play the great Ric Flair. So bear with me here, just a few minutes of clips for you.
Pandemonium in the ring, and obviously the heat is on. Here's the world champion, Ric Flair.
The heat is on, I gotta have David Crockett over here for this, because David Crockett, the illustrious announcer and vice president of Jim Crockett Promotions, always likes to tell the wrestling public something special when Ric Flair gets knocked down, or Luger gets put to sleep, or Arn and Tully trip over their feet by accident. Come on, David, explain what just happened on national TV to the legend Dusty Rhodes and to Heads of Stone, Ronnie Garvin. What just happened? They got the holy you-know-what beat out of them nationwide. And I don't mind telling you, I was wearing these $600 custom-made lizard shoes and this $13,000 Rolex when it happened. That's why I'm Ric Flair. That's why Luger's the U.S. champion, and that's why Arn and Tully are going to be the World Tag Team Champions. Now, Tony Schiavone, let's be hypothetical for a minute. Let's pretend that the great American dream, anything could happen. What would happen if Ronnie Garvin became the world champion? What would you do, Garvin? Be on the cover of Field Street? Huh, Garvin? Would you ride down the road with that golden retriever? You call a woman and talk to her? Huh? Would you go fishing? Would you sit in the corner bar with all the other rednecks drinking beer, talking about being the champ? Come on, pal. Dreams are meant to be exactly what they are. A dream. Reality is custom-made clothes, limousines, beautiful women, long blonde hair, styling and profiling, Rolex watches, yes, and any woman the Four Horsemen want, just like that. You see, Garvin, you're living a dream, and I'm happy for you. God bless you. Everybody needs to have something to live for each day. But you, in reality, are never, ever going to be able to say you are the world champion. You're never ever going to be able to say you beat Slick Rick. You're never going to be able to put this in your old pickup truck next to your blue jeans and your cowboy boots and your cut-off t-shirt and try to tell anybody, much less yourself, that you're the world champion. You see, Ronnie Garvin, you gotta be born a champion. You gotta have it inside. You gotta feel it, live it, breathe, and be prepared to die for it. You gotta make the assault on life itself. That's why some people think I've lost it. I haven't. What I've done is I've had it all. It's been mine. This is mine. It'll be mine my entire life. Woo!
The world champion Ric Flair. We'll be right back.
So it seems as if maybe Cody and Tony Schiavone are studying some old WCW tape of him there, as that was Ric Flair talking and doing an interview with Tony back in the day, back when the Four Horsemen were still together doing their thing and wreaking havoc on his father back in WCW when he was holding the big gold belt around his waist. But it's interesting to see how he's kind of flipped it on its head, and he's kind of looking at it from the other perspective, kind of looking at it from the other side and saying if those are the real things that matter, the expensive watches and all the money, and if that's what matters to a guy like MJF, to a guy like Ric Flair, if those are what the villains that's what they want, then he's out here to give that to him right here and now and say, let's cut to the chase. I'm here to give you exactly that. I want you in the ring. That's the type of person I am. So it's great storytelling, and although it did run a little bit long and he kind of dragged along the point a little bit, I think that the delivery was very solid, and the unscripted work and just letting these guys be free with the microphone in AEW is just a brilliant thing to see, and especially with the way that Cody has just been liberated and kind of let be this superstar here, just shows exactly the type of thing that it can create. And I'm so much looking forward to seeing him go back and forth with MJF and promos in the weeks to come, and eventually, of course, getting those two in the ring, and some brilliant little moments and little gems, too, where he said it's nice to see that they're botching the crossroads on 2 channels now, and just a lot of little hidden moments that just made this promo so great, and it just become, one of the best promos in the game out of Cody on a consistent basis, and just a great moment. And he also addressed the Butcher and the Blade and the Bunny situation and said that he's going to face them in whatever partner they choose for him, which ended up being the basically the jobber of AEW, QT Marshall. So we'll have him as a teammate next week, and we'll be facing Butcher and Blade. So that was a little tacked on thing there. So seems like from what also transpired that MJF had hired Butcher and Blade and Bunny as kind of like a service to basically attack the injured Cody. So it seems as if more than just they're tacked on, it's an interesting way to kind of introduce a tag team and get them a little bit of buzz as they're introduced in for the first time in the tag team division. So a nice little way to get them started and kind of show that they're not afraid to get their hands dirty, so to speak, and a nice way to kickstart their career here in AEW. But all in all, a great promo by Cody, and he's definitely been doing his WCW homework as he's been filing some trademarks, doing some suit shopping, and all around definitely paying a lot of homage rather to the old dead WCW organization that has put a lot of interesting ideas in his head so far for what to do with this young upstart company. So great work on this promo, and I loved every bit of it, even though it may have been just a few minutes too long and may have made a couple matches later on in the night suffer as a result. But hey, it's early on in this company's life, and when you're shining the way that he is, you can completely understand how sometimes you might be out there a minute or two too long. But regardless, I think that this was some really entertaining stuff, and I just think that it's Cody's company, and he's really just making the most of every minute that he has. So, but anyway, I'm dragging on here. Next up, we had Nyla Rose versus Leva Bates, which did not drag on whatsoever. Great little quick squash match, nothing too crazy. Just really showed off Nyla Rose as the beast as she should be, being the native beast as they like to call her. So, just kind of putting her as the kind of top monster in the women's division that she's looking to be. So eventually she'll come back around for a shot at Riho for the women's title, I'm sure. But a nice little spot too after the match that called back to the infamous NXT War Games Britt Baker in the crowd moment, where they she ended up putting Rick Knox through the table, where she was teasing hitting Leva Bates with another third beast bomb, and instead of doing that, she ended up picking up Rick Knox and putting him through a table instead of doing it to Shanna, and dropped Shanna on top of him. And that you just look out to the crowd and there's Britt Baker, hands over her mouth, shocked and awed as she likes to always be. And now it seems to have stemmed the Britt Baker challenge if you look at All Elite Wrestling's social media. So that'll be interesting to see if that becomes a trending thing. And brilliant little way to play off of a very sort of interesting approach by WWE with their crowd selection of going to Britt Baker. So we'll see if that continues to be a thing. A lot of people say they really hate this sort of taking shots and things like that. I say all's fun in love and war, so just go with it. And I think it makes for some entertaining stuff. And it's always fun when they take little pot shots here and there, as long as it's not too over the top and it's not so much of a focus of the programming. I think it's all in good fun. So I think that it's worth doing. But in that same token, we had next up after this the Lexicon of Les Champions, which is, the list of Chris Jericho, the retelling of the list that Chris Jericho had in 2016 in the WWE, and he scolded the fans quite mightily for trying to call it the list. And this is another one of those things where it really is just not going to do it justice if you don't just listen to the absolute brilliant delivery that Chris Jericho had. So I am going to take a moment and just let you listen to the Lexicon of Les Champions as he tells it, and just listen to the brilliance and the list of names and pop culture references, wrestling references, you name it, he said it practically last night. And just some entertaining stuff, especially when you consider this man's going on his third decade in the wrestling industry, and he's still just as entertaining, if not more entertaining, and in just as big a role, if not a bigger role, than he's ever been in. So it's just awesome to see. And here's a little clip from Les Champions.
Be honest, folks. Really be honest.
Best he's ever been, too. And I've seen his career. You have, too, from the formation.
So, Le Champion is in Champagne. Hold on. Don't get too excited. Don't put your heads up your rear ends too far. It's not like anybody from Champagne ever made a damn thing of themselves.
Interesting.
A bunch of losers come from Champagne, baby. Nobody from this town has ever been as successful as Chris Jericho has. Who the hell is Tony? Speaking of successful, look at this, huh? 12,000 bottles of a little bit of the bubbly sold in 1 week. It's completely because of me, because everything I touch turns to gold. And you can get your own bottle at littlebitofthebubbly.com. Just in time for the holidays. And speaking of holidays, the charlatans and snake oil salesmen in charge of AEW have told me I'm contractually obligated to have one more match in the year 2019. On the last Dynamite of 2019, December 18th in Corpus Christi, Texas, I am being forced to have one more match for this year. But here's the thing. Because I am Le Champion, I have the option to choose whoever I want to face. So what I did was I put together a little list. Seriously? Get out of 2016. This is not the list any longer. It is the Lexicon of Le Champion.
I don't think that word means what he thinks it means.
You tell him.
It will be right here.
And on this lexicon is everybody that I refuse to wrestle ever again in 2019. Let's start it from the top. Jon Moxley.
Yeah.
Cody Rhodes, because he can't. Young Bucks, Papa Buck, Uncle Buck, Buck Owens, Moxley, Hangman Page, Diamond Dallas Page, Page, Moxley, Scorpio Sky, Too Cold Scorpio, any member of the Scorpions, Moxley, Michael Nakazawa, Kenny Omega, Kenny Ortega, Kenny Shields, Kenny Chesney, Kenny from South Park, Moxley. The chubby guy over here with the popcorn in the 5th row. The ugly guy with the dumb glasses over here in the 3rd row. Moxley. Darby Allin, Rick Allen, Alan Jones, Moxley, Evil Uno, Angry Dose, Hateful Trays, Moxley. Marty.
Just like that, right before he could prove me right about Marty Scurll, he gets interrupted. But after that, he did end up getting a nice little back and forth with Luchasaurus, who is just an amazing future star in the making. I mean, just talking about his master's degree and kind of going toe-to-toe with Jericho in the ring. Had one little stumble at the beginning, but otherwise very smooth in his delivery, and I think that it was a very nice defining moment for him in his career, and will continue to be probably the eventual one to take on Jericho, although Jungle Boy ended up being the one to step up here and challenge Jericho for what will be on December 18th edition of Dynamite, coming here in a couple of weeks. But I think Luchasaurus will probably be the more likely one to take the belt off Jericho, if it is to be anyone out of Jurassic Express. But it will make for a very interesting contest for sure, and given all of the history between Jake Hager and Luchasaurus already, and the building heat there that they have on AEW Dark, and now that the challenge is made between Jungle Boy and him smacking Jericho, which I'm sure doesn't feel good for his ego, given that he thought he was this anorexic little boy moments ago. I definitely think that it's a very nice storyline, and they're building very smartly, and I love the fact that they're giving a chance to somebody who hasn't picked up a victory yet, and they're doing some interesting different things with the wins and losses, and trying to make Jericho kind of look like a cheap champion, and kind of defending only against weaker opponents, and it's very smart stuff, and I love the delivery of the promo, and the promo work continues to be an excellent and surprisingly underrated part of AEW's television, and is just spot on and spectacular on a week in, week out basis. So great work by Jericho and all the members of Jurassic Express for their parts in what was a great little moment and a great part of the night. And I will love to see Inner Circle versus Jurassic Express sometime in the future, maybe even in their own version of the match beyond at some point. So we'll keep an eye on how that progresses too. But next up here, we had Chris Statlander taking on Hikaru Shida, and this is exactly the type of stuff that the women's division needed. Both what happened in the ring during the contest and after. They're separating these two for a singles contest was exactly the right choice, exactly what I called for last week when they kind of had that scattered booking of them. I just really think that this was the right call, rather than having them in those weird tag situations. It just makes things so much easier to follow and differentiate, what type of style each individual person has, and let them tell their story in the ring. And this just really let both Hikaru and Chris shine a lot better, and ultimately, Chris's momentum with her signing the AEW contract and everything, she did end up taking the victory here, utilizing her size advantage throughout, and just using her varied offense. A lot of different types of maneuvers. A nice scissor kick that she has in her offense, very Booker T-like in her delivery of that, and just using her size to kind of bully Hikaru around the ring. There was a nice burst of offense that Hikaru got of her own, but this just really was a nice showcase of what the women's division can be at its best. But really, like I said, the size difference in momentum of Chris and her coming in with all the momentum in the world just led to her getting the victory here with a beautiful finisher, which is this sort of packaged tombstone pile driver that they're dubbing the Big Bang Theory, which I love both the name and the finisher, so I'm loving everything about this signing and where this is progressing, and hopefully she will be a big part of the women's division going forward, because I think there's a lot of good things for her in AEW and for AEW as a result of having her. So this was a great little matchup, and then afterwards the Nightmare Collective showed up, basically to announce what the hell they were doing the past few weeks, collecting all this hair and doing this weird little wig ceremony thing that they've been doing with the knife, and they sort of kind of explained it, that they're the Nightmare Collective, an extension of the Nightmare family, but that's kind of all. They didn't really explain much more than that. They said that they do the dirty work, and it kind of similar to the Dark Order and also the Butcher and Blade and Bunny, and it seems like there's a lot of cult-esque stables going on, and it could use some differentiating. I realize the haircutting thing is a very odd differentiator in and of itself, but it very much seems like it's a lot of borrowed pieces of different things, and that's where maybe a writing team could help in some aspects. But I think that it's good to just see them paying attention to the women's division and giving it some shine regardless. So it's hard to really nitpick. But like I said, they tried to get Chris to join this Nightmare Collective by basically having her pledge her allegiance to it. By essentially probably offering her hair and whatever weird ceremony that's supposed to be. And so she didn't answer right away, which was taken as a rejection. So Awesome Kong got in her face, and really was surprisingly not that much larger, but still much more imposing monster of a figure in general still. But then a fan, actually, indie wrestler Melanie Cruz, also known as Raven's Ash, which you can check out my article on lastwordonprowrestling.com about that for more details, titled Indie Veteran Melanie Cruz Pledges to Nightmare Collective, if you want to check out a little more detail about all of her career and everything like that leading up to this kind of big break moment just 2.5 hours from her hometown in Illinois, and really interesting stuff here. But she ended up doing the pledge in her place and saving a likely beatdown of the galaxy's favorite alien Statlander here. So this stable certainly odd, and it'll be interesting to see how they differentiate it from things like the Straight Edge Society, the Dark Order, and the Bray Wyatts of the world. So it's like I said, it feels like kind of a misfit toy, a bunch of pieces of different broken toys all put together, and so it needs some things to kind of break out and make it feel like its own. So we'll see how that goes from here on out. And speaking of stables, we had another leader of another stable here in All Elite Wrestling, Christopher Daniels, taking on Pentagon Jr. in a nice little contest, but I kind of feel afraid that they may have, or maybe he himself rushed himself back from injury here, because I think Christopher Daniels kind of just wasn't quite up to 100%, just wasn't quite the performance that you normally expect out of him. Just a couple of missed spots. There was an Arabian moonsault that he landed hard on the ramp that he went to go for at one point, and you can tell it was a bit of a stinger, kind of, getting Pentagon to get him into the ring, and similar moment on a falling lariat that even JR called bowling shoe ugly, and just some little things like that you could tell they just weren't quite clicking on the same page like they normally would be in a tag team atmosphere, for example, or maybe if Christopher Daniels was in the single atmosphere at 100% health and not coming off of the pinched nerve that he had. So this was definitely still a good contest, still had some good energy, some good moments, but it just never quite felt like they got on the same page. Some good storytelling, however, with some teasing different forms of pile drivers onto the stage that caused the injury in the first place to Christopher Daniels. There was a Canadian Destroyer that Pentagon went for, a package pile driver that Daniels went for that actually caused his injury. All playing off the Daniels injury very smartly in nice little callback moments there on that ramp. So all very smart stuff, kind of playing off of that injury, and then it did end up actually ending with a pile driver as Rey Fenix brought down the mic stand, which was teased as being used, and when Daniels tried to do the babyface move and say he didn't want to use it, he threw it out. The ref got distracted by this moment and got a good old swift kick to the nuts by Pentagon, which ended up leading to the devastating looking package pile driver for the win. And like I said, solid contest, nothing really wrong with it, just a lower level contest between two very higher level athletes, so it's one of those things where you're kind of expecting so much from them that it's kind of unfair when you look at a contest that's very decent, especially for television, and you look at it and say you want so much more, but that's just the nature of how good these two individuals are. So great matchup still nonetheless, and I was still very much entertained, but still wanting so much more out of these two. So hopefully they'll get another singles match somewhere down the line, maybe at a pay-per-view, but it looks like as of right now it is building towards the Lucha Brothers versus SCU sometime in the future for those tag team titles, so I can't complain about that either. So looking forward to seeing that come to fruition at some point. Would have been nice to also see, not complaining too much, both of the Lucha Brothers take a victory here, given that they're supposed to be going for those titles, but once again, being nitpicky here, and a very entertaining night of wrestling, and this was no exception to the rule. So moving on along here, we had Moxley taking on Janela right after that as well, and this was the rematch to their Fyter Fest Lights Out contest. Kind of a nice little callback to the fact that Moxley is kind of on this redemption kick, kind of coming back and trying to right the wrongs of the fact that he's done a few of those and hasn't gotten credit for those on the win-loss records, which ultimately are what get you title shots, except for Jungle Boy. But, that's supposed to be the way it goes, so it was a nice little way of kind of telling a story by having these two come together, besides just the fact that they're two crazy bastards who like to mix it up and have a good fight every now and again. So started off nicely along those lines as well with some technical wrestling, but Moxley still likes to mix it in and get a little grungy with it too, so he kicked out the legs of Janela and did a little fireman's toss moment too, so he's kind of mixing in both the street fighting with the technical, and it just kind of speaks to the character work that he gets to do with his ring psychology that probably wasn't afforded to him in WWE when he was Dean Ambrose, but much more afforded to him now that he's Jon Moxley. So it's a bit of a character transformation that went along with the name change, and some nice moves on calling to that as well. A paradigm shift on the ramp that was countered beautifully by Janela, where he rolled over the ropes, kind of like skinning the cradle a little bit, and just rolling over it, then back into a tornado DDT. Just some great counter catch wrestling sort of maneuvership here, and just great stuff for people who are basically called just hardcore wrestlers most of the time, and just nice little spots. A rolling schoolboy slam that was a nice kind of teasing near fall. It would be interesting interesting to see somebody actually employ that as a finisher at this point, given how devastating, roll-ups and everything are used in wrestling nowadays and how much booking relies upon using roll-ups as a finisher. So seeing somebody do basically a roll-up off of the top rope as a finisher would be a kind of genius attack on kayfabe finishing move. So we'll see if that ever happens in wrestling, but that just kind of stuck out in my mind as something worth noting here. But then we ended up having a nice little New Japan kind of call out where Janela ended up putting Moxley through the table. The camera shot didn't quite give you the best angle of that, but beggars can't be choosers here. At least we got to see a little bit of hardcore action in our television product. So that was a nice little moment and kind of call to the fact that you can't quite contain these two guys no matter what you do with the rule book. And, ended up having him roll him into the ring, getting frustrated as he tried to put him away but couldn't. And this ultimately led to Moxley taking the advantage, hitting a paradigm shift off the top rope, and then once more in the middle of the ring just to put the cherry on top, if you will, and ended up putting the end of the match to Janela here. And just a nice contest. Felt a little bit rushed here by time. You kind of looked at the clock and said, oh boy, they only got a little less than 15 minutes to do this, especially when they were given so much freedom and time on Fyter Fest. It felt like it was a little bit of a letdown in comparison, but it was nice to see them get a little more technical, do a little bit more of mat-based wrestling at the beginning and play off of that a bit. So very nice contest, and I thought that it capped off the night very beautifully with having Jericho come out after this, having his music hit, and kind of having all of Inner Circle behind him so that he could have his tough guy moment and, basically say, hey Moxley, I can be tough too, even though he's supported by four guys, just showing the kind of delusional nature of the ego of Le Champion. And I love every bit of how they're handling his character and handling his ego, and I just loved this episode of Dynamite, and I thought it was a great rebound from an otherwise a little bit of a down week last week. So this definitely was an awesome week for me, and I loved every minute of it from start to finish, and I think that they really squeezed a very good show into 2 hours. So although a couple things suffered from time constraints, you can kind of see why. Maybe leaving the Nyla Rose matchup off, leaving it on Dark or something like that, but at the same time, when you're trying to establish dominance and establish a character, you understand why you want to put it on television and not just on your YouTube product. So, like I said, being nitpicky here for a very, very great episode of wrestling television, which, in my very humble opinion, you can flame me for this, get angry all you want, but it's the best wrestling on television right now, folks. You can go ahead and book it. You can go ahead and send me all the angry tweets you want about it, but that's just my opinion. So go ahead and send your angry tweets at Spots High on Twitter. I've been your host, Zach Perez. Check out my articles on Last Word on ProWrestling.com, where I have a write-up right now of AEW Dynamite from this week, last week, some WWE content on there. So if you hate me for AEW, you can love me for liking WWE as well. I'm an unbiased person. Whatever you say, it's true. But you can also check out my content over on WhatCulture.com as well. And then, of course, always every week here with the AEW Aftershock podcast, bringing you the review of AEW Dynamite after it happens. And until next time, goodbye and good night.
Goodbye and good night. Goodbye and good night. Goodbye and good night. Goodbye and good night.